Welcome to Quickshots. Quickshots.
Welcome to Quickshots with your...
I did. Welcome to Quickshots. She is back. I'm going to literally collapse into a pillow in about 2 hours.
All right, well, I'll give you the first one then so that you can do two today and I'll do one. I'll start with Kate wanting to know, and topical, because we covered a bit of this in the main ep. Why do banks offer better deals for new business? Surely it's cheaper to keep customers that are already customers. Is it just because people are lazy and don't move banks?
Absolutely. It is, absolutely. Of course it's cheaper for them to retain your business, but I guess when they offer new business a better rate, right, it does increase their book. And they always want to grow their business. And I guess they always take banks a long-term view of your rate eventually changing, or, you know, they could be hiding a couple of bits and pieces in some loan costs or some setup fees, application fees. You never know. Depends what bank you're dealing with. But I suppose in terms of business, you know, the cost of new leads or the discounted rate is just the cost of doing new business and increasing your customer base. A lot of people just have this weird affinity to their bank. They just can't be bothered. It is so much harder to refinance than it is to just stay with your bank. And I think that goes for a lot of things in our lives. We talked this week about a lot of the new loans being refinances. So people actually mustering up the courage to do that paperwork and get out of there. But look, it goes without saying, if you are being lazy, you're probably overpaying. You're probably paying lazy tax, loyalty tax.
Absolutely. Kate, there you go.
Absolutely. I'm paying a little bit of it. And I should be paying less of it. All right. So we talked about this week. A few people wrote in because GDP, gross domestic product, a big indicator of our economy, is a bit of a hot topic at the moment off the back of inflation, interest rates, yada, yada. So the question, everything. The question we got from Steve, and I feel like so many Steves write in, is basically why does GDP matter to us, particularly when we're talking about being residential property investors?
It is a indicator of the economic health of a country. So we look at GDP, it's the gross domestic product. And what it means is it's the total value of all the goods and services sold within a country over a period. And specifically that includes locals like us buying goods and services, but also the value of goods and services that are sold overseas to overseas countries or people from other overseas countries. And to put that in perspective, we today sell about $2 trillion worth of goods and services. In fact, slightly more every single year. Ooh. That's doubled in the last decade. So we as a country, very, very healthy and have a very high rate of growth in our GDP. And that's often the number that's measured is what's been the growth year on year in the value of the goods and services sold. And that number is 3.6 today. 3.6% for the year. It was about 2% before the pandemic and sat there for quite some time, got as low as negative 5 or 6% during the pandemic. So it is 3.6 today percent. And what it means is we have a very, very healthy economy driven by mining and household consumption, which we talked about in the main pod. So a good question from Steve. Sophia wants to know, and I'll let you finish on this one. How high can interest rates go before it affects the economy too much? What can we expect interest rates to hit the ceiling at?
Flippin' heck, Sophia. Okay, so in our main pod this week, we talked about interest rates today with the Reserve Bank of Australia at 2.35%. The 10-year average is 2.5%. You know, we might be able to expect we're floating around that 10-year average. It all is going to depend on inflation. If inflation goes up, then we're going to have to put our interest rates up a little bit. We might even have to put them down a little bit to sort of cater that, I should say offset that, which is ultimately the job of the Reserve Bank of Australia, is to be able to gauge where we're at, so that we're able to afford our higher costs. That's why they look at not only interest rates, but what we spend our money on, and then, of course, what we're getting paid and unemployment. It's all tied up into a bow. The 20-year average, by the way, we talked about this week in the main pod also, is 4%. That's the 4% cash rate with the Reserve Bank of Australia. So, I mean, how high can it go before it affects the economy, Sophia? I mean, I couldn't say. I honestly couldn't say. I mean, it's so regulated. And in a way, it's affecting us now. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a negative end of the world thing, but it's always affecting us because it sort of changes, I guess, what we prioritize, how we spend our money. James, you want to say something there?
Well, I was going to say, I think too, you made a good point in the main pod this week that roughly a third of all borrowers actually aren't feeling these increases yet. So in Australia, there's 10 trillion, give or take, in total property values. There's $2 trillion worth of debt, and a third of that, they're on fixed interest rates. So their interest rates aren't actually moving today. That number dropped to, I think, a quarter of all people by the end of the year, and then drops even more at the end of next year. So in terms of, how high can they go before it affects the economy too much, it's not necessarily how high can they go, but how long do they have to stay where they are before it starts affecting the economy.
But also too, cuz I think, if it starts to affect the economy, then the Reserve Bank will come out, and then that next month they may drop them by 0.5%. So the point is that it doesn't affect us too much, or it doesn't get to that point. Now, I'm not saying what the Reserve Bank do and decide is the be all and end all and they know best, because that may not be the case. A lot of criticism throughout the last few years, but I think that the idea and their job is that they sort of soften the blow for us or the economy so that it's not affected, and our GDP, as you've just talked about, can thrive.
I think we're near the ceiling though, Sophia. That's my personal view. I'm one of 35,000 different opinions that are floating around in the world at the moment. But and the reason for that is, Alex mentioned, I think, that just in answering that, Reserve Bank rate is about 2.5% today, 2.35. It's been 2.5% on average over the last 10 years. And the whole commentary's been getting back to normal, and we're pretty much back to normal. The 10-year average would have to be considered pretty normal. So I don't think there's too much more of that to come, Sophia.
And I'm sorry, I just have to say as well on that, that the focus can't all be around interest rates, because, I've come back from holiday and sort of, I sort of laugh in a way, because everyone's talking about interest rates, and then when we get so focused on that, we forget that we have the lowest rental vacancy rate that we've nearly had in history. It's just this crazy time where, we can't worry too much, but of course we've got to keep our eye on the ball. And if you are a property owner and if you're a renter, you've just got to keep an eye on the ball today. So what can we expect? Well, just don't expect anything. Just keep your eye on the prize.
Well done. Enjoy that nap, Alex. Great having you back as always, and great questions from Steve, Kate and Sophia. Thank you very much, guys. Look forward to seeing and talking to you next week. If you've got any questions, hit us up.
Hit us up. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Double Shot with your favourite cousins, Alex and James Fitzgerald. If you've got a burning question or something we absolutely need to talk about on the pod, please write to us. Both of our emails are in the show notes. For little real estate tidbits and a little bit of banter, okay, a lot of banter, you can follow us on the gram. Our handle is thedoubleshot.podcast. That, my friends, is thedoubleshot.podcast. Until next time, think of us when you sit back and sip your next double shot.